and Justice. And the Worldwide Teach-In on Climate and Justice is a project of the graduate programs of sustainability at Bard College. And we're joined by the director of the programs, Eben Goodstein, who will also be speaking today. So first I want to acknowledge and thank the Faculty Collaborative, who are one of our partners in putting on these webinars. This is our fourth and final webinar with the Faculty Collaborative, but we will be continuing to have these webinars on Wednesdays at the same time through the middle of December, and then we'll pick them up at some point in early January. We also have sessions at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, and you are welcome to join us again or at a different link. So you have to go on to the Worldwide Teach-In website. Tobias Hess, who's doing the tech for us, and our Director of Education Outreach will be putting that and other links into the chat. And so if you, as I expect you will, are excited by what you hear this morning, tweet it out, share it with your friends, and encourage them to come and join us tonight. So the Worldwide Teach-In on Climate and Justice is a, and I should say that my background is actually a year out of date. The next one will be on or about the 29th of March, 2023. And, but it's a way to seek to engage as many people as we can around the world in conversation about climate change, climate solutions, climate justice. And we are a strong believer in that every person, regardless of their fields of interest and expertise, has an important role to play in communicating and in helping us to solve the emergency of climate change. So we have a strong affinity to engagements with the arts and with artists. As a scientist myself, I realize that most people other than scientists are not necessarily moved by data and graphs and tables, but we need to have other ways to, and other partners to help us to communicate. And so today in particular, we're going to be focusing on the role of arts, which are in themselves a multifaceted, multi-dimensional endeavor, and museums and galleries as partner institutions to help us to tell our stories and to reach out to others who need to be part of our community and part of our educators. So we have two speakers today, and the format is that we'll go first with Natalie Marsh, and then with Alisa Singer, and then I will turn it to my colleague Eben, who will then present about the Worldwide Teach-In. So we'll go for roughly an hour, and we recognize that some people may need to leave early. We are recording this. We will share the recording and the link to the slides with, and if there are other things that are put in the chat, we'll share all of that with you as a follow-up. So let me first begin by introducing Dr. Natalie Marsh, who we've been working with for around a year. Natalie is a experienced leader in the world of academic museums and galleries, working with Kenyon College, Denison University, Columbus College of Arts and Design as director and curator. She's also been very active in the leadership of the Association of Academic Museums and Galleries, and I know that some of you have joined us from that community, and so we thank you for joining. And then Natalie's most recent act, I guess, is with a group that she co-founded and leads the virtual visiting artists. And Natalie will be talking about that, as well as her the more general ways of how we who are not necessarily from the world of museums, galleries, and arts can engage. So we do ask everybody to please keep yourself muted so we don't get the background here. So go ahead, Natalie, please. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you, David. Thanks also to Evan and to the Faculty Collaborative. Looking forward to talking to you today. And I won't take a great deal of time. I just want to kind of jump in and share with you a document that we created for some past programs, similar webinars. So I'm going to ask Alex to make sure that's in the chat, kind of in your queue. This is a document that we created as a way for academic museums and galleries to think about collaborating and developing climate programming on their campuses. And I think it works for those of you who come from that world, who are based at academic museums and galleries, but I think it's also really useful and helpful for those of you who are faculty members or researchers at universities to begin to think about the role of galleries and museums on your respective campuses. There are 5 key things that I really want to cover today, and I hope that this will lead into a robust conversation immediately after my talk or towards the end. So depending on how we're going to do that. Having spent more than 20 years leading academic museums and galleries in the Midwest, and even before that, having some experience in posts in non-academic museums and galleries, but also in some Big Ten museum, contemporary art museum. There are these sort of 5 really important ways that I think museums of all types could be really useful to you in your teaching and in your professional roles as educators. The first is really, it's important to understand that academic museums and galleries have education staff that are really completely dedicated to finding ways, really creative ways, to engage in your curriculum and to help support you, much the way a variety of other resources across campuses are situated to support teaching and learning. And the thing that you should understand is that the education department, if your academic museum or gallery is large enough to have multiple educators on staff, will be the first point of contact that you might want to make. So if you're interested in finding out, how an academic museum or gallery could relate to your curriculum or whatever you're teaching, it's a great place to just make a cold call, that education department. The type of staff member that you might want to reach out to first is a curator of academic programs. That's a job title that emerged in about the mid-1990s and has grown into something that has become almost a kind of requisite staff position if museums and galleries have the resources to have a number of staff positions dedicated to education. A curator of academic programs, a coordinator of academic programs, a liaison. These are the kinds of job titles to look for. And these are the staff members who are really well trained. Often they have themselves terminal degrees in not just art history, but it could be any kind of affiliated discipline. Their job is to create links between curriculum across the entire campus and the resources of their museum. That could mean collections, ways that collection objects, fine art, anthropological, you name it, scientific collections, the way that those collections could be creatively integrated into your lesson plans. So please take advantage of those people. They're waiting to work with you. They're excited to find really innovative ways to engage in your subject matter. And they're probably pretty experienced at it. So look for them. They are excellent experts. They work often across a number of categories. So it's not just them helping you bring your class to the museum. It could as much be about connecting or brainstorming ways that maybe an upcoming exhibition or a collection object could actually be used to launch an effective conversation in your classroom. They often work at the intersection of class visits, collections, exhibitions, which may be temporary and up for just a few months at a time, and then public programs. Often academic museums and galleries have a long 2 to 3, maybe even 4-year advance schedule, and they can start to have conversations with you as faculty members 2 years in advance of an exhibition coming up that might be really perfectly suited to some curriculum that you're responsible for in your department. So it's worth getting to know these people and having a cup of coffee with them and beginning that conversation. It's also really valuable, I think, for the museum staff to know what you're thinking about as a faculty member so that they can do a better job of developing programming that helps support your teaching. And so that dialogue, the sooner it begins, the more effective you can work together. That's the first kind of category that I wanted to make sure all of you were aware of. The second thing I want you to think about is how to look to collections as a really important resource for teaching and learning. I think that from many years of doing this professionally at a variety of different institutions, there's a tendency on the part of faculty to think that, that collections, if it's an art museum, for example, that those collections, if you're not teaching art history, they're not really going to be useful to you. And that's really not the case. So often working with faculty in the social sciences and the natural sciences, and in the humanities, they were surprised to learn that if they actually jump in and do a little brainstorming with their academic museum, suddenly they realize that, that there are so many opportunities to advance exactly the kind of lesson plan that they have in their curriculum, just in a more creative sort of way. So if, for example, you need to teach a certain kind of concept in the social sciences, there's probably a work of art or even a collection, a sub-collection in a museum that can help you do that. It can be the foundation for launching a conversation that leads to exactly the kind of learning goals that you've outlined for your students. And so that's where it's very important, returning to the first point that I had about engaging in a conversation with those educators who are on staff at the academic museum or gallery, to begin learning about those collections and talking to them about the kinds of things you're trying to get across to your students and teach them. Remember too that I've seen so often or heard kind of anecdotal stories from faculty members about how important it seemed to them to get their students out of the classroom or out of the lab and into a different learning context. And that's where a kind of the field trip effect kind of plays a role. Suddenly students kind of perked up often when they were invited to meet and have a session of that class at the museum or the gallery. And these might be students who weren't really all that engaged, you know, in the traditional classroom environment. Suddenly something clicked and they turned a corner academically. So take advantage of that, not just at academic museums and galleries, but at other kinds of resources across your campus. Maybe you have a nature preserve, as many do. Maybe you have some spaces, dedicated spaces in a library or some other kind of facility. I'd really encourage that. That ties into something else that so many times I heard again and again, which was that students might not be responsive to a particular kind of discipline or teaching mode, but when they entered a kind of concept through a work of art or a collection object, an artifact, something clicked for them. So remember that there are different kinds of learners and different things really turn them on, you know? And the academic museum staff is cued into that. And they're able to actually brainstorm with you to come up with unique kinds of, unique kinds of lesson plans or exercises, activities for your class that will provoke that, that kind of turn in a student. So give that a shot. And then the fifth thing that I really wanted to make sure everybody recognized is that, and I think this leads into what Alisa will be sharing with us, is that contemporary artists and museum curators are themselves often scholars and researchers in their own right. And they have unique perspectives and knowledge to share. They happen to choose a different discipline to engage with that data or develop that knowledge. And that can be useful to you as a teacher, no matter what your discipline might be. And so I have worked with and continue to work with so many artists, contemporary artists, who are really experts at using data and understanding scientific data, for example, and expressing that data in ways that can be profoundly impactful. So take advantage of that, because that is probably going to be very useful in the teaching and learning process. Many of your students might not understand a concept or understand data, but artists are often the translators and the storytellers who can help them understand the importance of what you're trying to share and get across. And I think that goes to wrap back up to the first point I had, the museum curators, as I mentioned, they are scholars and researchers as well, and they're very adept at, because this is what they do every single day, they're very adept at figuring out how to communicate to a public, how to communicate to a group of students from across, all disciplines. So I would urge you to actually engage with them and take advantage of that in your work. For those of you who are academic museum and gallery professionals, it's good to have you here. And I hope that the attachment, the document that we shared, is useful for you as well, because it gives you some ideas about ways that you might want to bring together faculty from across your campus and create programming to support the Solve Climate initiative that David and Eben have been sharing over the course of this 4-session program with the Faculty Collaborative. So I think that that's just a kind of foundation that I hope will lead to a conversation this morning. And I think I'll turn it over to David, either for Q&A or if we're going to go into Alisa's program.
I think we'll have a couple of minutes for a couple of questions and answers if we have them. So you can either put that in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask. But Natalie, I also wanted to ask you, you were great on point in terms of engagement with museums and galleries. But why don't you also talk for a couple of minutes about ViVA? And I mean, I know it's a little bit of a changing story, but kind of let us know about ViVA, because I think
David,
it's really important.
Jump in for just a second and
Sure.
just ask people to please introduce yourself in the chat. I would love to know who's here. So if you would just say hi, you know, if you're a professor or a student, what school you're coming from, what part of the world you're from, it'd be great to know who's with us today.
Yeah, and you can follow my lead, but maybe not as much information if you don't want to share that. But yeah, so go ahead, Natalie.
Sure. So after more than 20 years in academic museums and galleries, as a founding director and chief curator of those museums, I actually had the first ever opportunity, and I think faculty will appreciate this, for a sabbatical. That started in 2019. And of course, as we all know, within 6 months, the pandemic began to unfold. And I was already thinking about next steps and what I wanted to do next. And that led ultimately to thinking about climate change, but having a background in thinking about how technology was changing art and design, began to think about more efficient ways for visiting artist programming to be delivered on campuses and in classrooms. And also wanted to find a way for us to find low carbon alternatives to the traditional visiting artist model, which often involves flying a visiting artist across country, consuming up to 3 or 4 days of their time, valuable time, away from their families and their own teaching and their studio practice, for what really ultimately amounts to, you know, an hour public talk in an auditorium with a slide deck, you know, and if you're lucky, as an academic museum or gallery, you'll work to connect that artist with some group of students. Maybe a professor will invite them to come to a class or two, if you're lucky. And so that seems to be a real waste of resources and a huge carbon footprint for a program that could be managed quite effectively through virtual technology. So the idea for ViVA is based in that. If you go to our website, we brought together a list of artists who work across a variety of different themes, not exclusively climate related, but all intersecting with climate and environmental justice. And these artists are available to speak for a very reasonable and much more affordable, when you think about it, a more affordable kind of price point. When you have to fly an artist clear across country, you're spending an awful lot of time and money. And so we reduce that as well. So it's much more budget conscious. So ViVA is available to professors teaching classes, but also to academic museums and galleries, libraries, and the full range of different kinds of organizations.
Thanks, Natalie. Does anybody have questions for Natalie? I mean, it was very clear, but I'm sure there probably are some questions or comments that you want to make. Well, maybe we'll just go on to Alisa, and then we'll, and thank you all for putting your information in the chat. We've got a very interesting global audience here, so we'll hope to have a chance to get some thoughts from what you all are doing. So as I mentioned with the outset, that you know, other than scientists, you know, normal people, as it were, are not necessarily moved by data. But Alisa Singer is a normal person who has helped us to, maybe a super normal person really, who sees not only information but beauty in data and in graphs. And so after a career as an attorney, that she and also as an artist, that she has developed an amazing approach to turn graphs, climate graphs, into beautiful art, and to use that to share information about climate and climate change. She's been featured with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change as the covers of the most recent reports, and she'll share with you has an approach that I think could be really valuable for all of us in helping to communicate around climate. So I'm going to turn it to Alisa because she has a beautiful presentation that I certainly want to see. So go ahead, please, Alisa.
Before I start, I just want to say I did not realize how complementary what I do is with what Natalie was talking about. And just a little sidebar, I just recently served on the board of an academic art museum, well, a foundation, college foundation that owned a collection and that was housed in the academic museum. And so we dealt with a number of the issues that Natalie was speaking about, including challenges on making the collection accessible to faculty, and how do you encourage people to integrate it into their curriculum. What I've done with the art is very similar in terms of approach, trying to find another way to tell the story using art as a vehicle to get people to focus on the science and to engage people that might otherwise be uninterested, because let's face it, how many of us go to exhibits of charts and graphs? But most of us like art. So Tobias, let me just also apologize in advance. Natalie, your presentation was wonderful and natural, and you spoke to us, and I am going to read from a script because I have a huge number of slides, and I wanted to get through them without taking up too much time. And so I'm going to try to stay on script so that Tobias can advance the slides and we can get through an overview of a very big collection of art. So hello, I'm going to introduce you to Environmental Graphiti. This is a project I started end of 2014, beginning of 2015, marrying art with cause my own way. And I want to show you first a bit about the collection. What is this art? How does it work? And then talk about ways it has been used, and end up with a new project that I think works well with what the South Climate, the Worldwide Teach-In is trying to do. I think it's an interesting option. So we can, I'm not sure, Tobias, I'm not sure where we are on. I think I'm looking at, okay, if we start off here, that we can just move forward to slide 2. And Environmental Graphiti is a series of digital paintings which uses contemporary art as a vehicle to enhance the understanding of the science of climate change. I believe art is a uniquely effective tool to engage people of all backgrounds in the climate science conversation. It's a gateway and an access point that crosses all boundaries and barriers, geographic, language, national, religious, political. And it's very unique and powerful in that way. Environmental graffiti art, as David has mentioned, has been extensively exhibited in the US and other parts of the world and has been featured on the covers of 3 recent major UN climate reports. The collections are owned by dozens of universities, including sizable collections held by UC Irvine, Loyola University Chicago, Michigan Tech, and recently large collections acquired by Georgetown University and Smith College. The art has also been exhibited in a number of science museums and is owned by the Ontario Science Center in Toronto and the Peggy Noted Art Nature Museum in Chicago. And so as we look at each piece of art, I think you'll initially feel that this appears to be an abstract work, but then the way we engage people in the underlying message is to then reveal that the art is actually based on a graph or chart or word or number. Tobias, I think we can move to slide 6. So in this case, and just to give you an idea of how the art is created, I start with usually a graph or a chart, but sometimes a word or a number that has key significance. And this becomes a blueprint for the art. And viewing the art becomes an interactive experience as people tend to both look at the art and then once they realize, and I should mention that the art is typically exhibited with a plaque next to it that shows you the data and the message behind it and the graphic source. So this becomes an interactive experience as once you realize that it's not abstract, you tend to go back and forth between the art and the graph. You try to find where is the science embodied in the art, and sort of in the process you say, so what is this about? Oh, sources and sinks, the balance of carbon in the atmosphere with sinks to capture it. So this is a way of, I wouldn't say tricking people, but engaging people by surprising them and intriguing them to discover this is not art, but this is actually science. The collection consists of over 100 digital paintings. I've been very busy and let me just make a comment about what Natalie was speaking to at the end of her presentation, which is the benefits of having a digital approach. For me, it means that the art can easily be shared anywhere in the world. And it can be used both digitally and, of course, printed more traditionally. But that digital aspect, the fact that it is created digitally, does allow for a lot of different opportunities for how it can be used cost effectively. So, as I said, it consists of over 100 digital paintings, but because there are so many, I have on my website categorized and curated them into 5 galleries, but you can slice and dice them any way you want. But for purposes of creating a narrative, I've divided into 5 galleries. Why is our climate changing? How is our world being impacted? Who is at risk, covering both humans and other species? What can we do to address climate change? And let's explore some of the myths about climate change that are, of course, we've all seen spread around. So there is probably about a dozen or so pieces in each gallery, but for purposes of this presentation, I'll just choose one to give you, a sample. And in this case, this is from the gallery, Why is Our Climate Changing? And you can move on to the graph. This gallery addresses issues such as what are the sources of carbon emissions, fossil fuels, deforestation, as you can see here, and various different ways of understanding the correlation between carbon emissions and temperature rise, among other factors, in terms of why our world is changing. The next gallery focuses on how our world is being impacted, and among the impacts represented in this gallery are global temperature rise, of course, but also melting of glaciers and sea ice, rising ocean levels, high tide flooding, ocean warming and acidification, increase in frequency and intensity of major storms and natural disasters, wildfires is indicated here, and drought. So there are works of art that represent all of these issues and more. And then the next gallery focuses on who is at risk. And this deals not only with humans, but also other species. So we talk about here, or the pieces focus on things like flooding for coastal communities, species at risk of extinction, including marine life and coral reefs, special health risks to humans, and especially to those most vulnerable, like children, the elderly, and the poor, climate refugees, and the inequity of climate change, where those least responsible are most affected. The next gallery is all about addressing climate change. What can we do? And this gallery explores promising strategies. And there's some good news, more governments adopting climate mitigation policies, major investments by industry taking some of the regulatory slack. The art tracks falling costs of wind, solar, and batteries, and corresponding rise in the use and investment in renewables, and explores other scenarios and pathways for getting to net zero emissions. And the final gallery is focusing on myths. Climate change has become a political issue, as we all know, leading to inaccurate claims and misleading information. In this selection of art, a few of these myths are debunked, including misleading statements such as global warming is due to natural causes, not human activities. Climate scientists are alarmist that predictions have been inaccurate. A renewable energy economy would be too expensive and result in too many lost jobs. There are no feasible paths to net zero emissions, and there is time to deal with this problem later. So that is, Tobias, you did a great job. Thank you. That is a great overview, I think, or a good overview of the art. So I'd like to, now that you've glimpsed the collection, let's talk about how you might use the art to further the goals of your own institution, school, or other organization. So this slide shows a little bit about physical exhibits. And of course, this simply means the art is printed versus used digitally. Exhibits can be permanent acquisitions. As I mentioned, a number of institutions and universities have acquired collections of the art. The exhibits can be temporary, and these pictures show both. And they also can be as brief as an afternoon or a few days to enhance a particular event. You'll typically see the art printed out large, and it's usually on metal, lightweight aluminum, and displayed side by side with plaques that show the source data and explanation. The prints can vary in size. The standard would be maybe 30 by 40, 30 by 30. Medium also varies, usually according to budget. So metal is the top choice for most exhibits, but sometimes canvas, but art paper mounted on board is also a great option, less costly, and works for both permanent and temporary installations. And the art on easels for short-term displays also very, very effective. So we also have done some digital displays. So in addition to a PowerPoint like the one you're seeing now, the art in this case is the top one is the Library of the University of Chicago Harris School of Public Policy, and the image below is from one of the cover images, the UN report, and this was at a conference in Poland in 2018. So just to give you a sense of obviously the digital options. And then we can talk a little bit about how you can use the size of the collection to focus on a particular issue. So for example, there are probably 10 pieces or at least that show how our oceans are affected. So if your institution is an aquarium or wants to do a particular, focus area on climate change and oceans, there are a subset of pieces that you can use. And in this case, this is a piece that focuses more on local risks that also are global risks. So the narrative, the ability to dramatize macro to micro, shows how global issues can create local threats and impacts. In this case, we're looking at changes in the Great Salt Lake, which is of course reflective of rivers drying up all over the world. So I do feel the benefit of this collection, the size of the collection, the ability to focus on a theme, a message, a local impact, the ability to bring global issues home is very, very important in telling the story. The art, as I think mentioned, can also be found on covers of scientific publications and research reports and magazines. It can be incorporated into educational materials, sprinkled through reports. It can be, or in your any other curriculum materials, but it also can be used in promotional materials or on a website. So if you have an event and you want, this is very typical use of the art, incorporate even, in fact, the way I got to David was through a professor at Southern Illinois University who asked to use the art for a teach-in, which David has mentioned we'll talk more about later. So there's many ways. I'm very open to any way that the art can further what you're trying to accomplish. And as Natalie referred to in her talk, climate change is a multifaceted issue. It affects studies in many different areas, including math, science, engineering, biology, chemistry, physics, geology, political science, business, economics, statistics, policy, global health, ethics, art, of course, communications, and the humanities. And I think it can be a very useful jumping off point to begin discussions and to engage professors and students across disciplines. So the art can be a great way to, start an exhibit and create a panel that will talk about climate change from different perspectives. It's an entry point to talk about issues such as climate injustice, the particular challenges facing regions with fewer resources for mitigation and adaptation, and the obligations of developed nations to developing nations that are most impacted by climate change and least responsible for it. So that's a little overview of how the art has been used. I've just, in the last few months, started a new project that I'm really excited about that I think could work very well with people who are considering a climate teach-in or many other kinds of exhibits. So the idea here is to take the art off the walls of the institutions and universities, museums, and other galleries and bring it out into the streets so that people who aren't necessarily looking to be educated will stumble across it unexpectedly as they go about their day. So what I'm proposing is a posting campaign that it is a concept that I would like to integrate both nationally and internationally if possible, but it's also fundamentally a very local project. That's something that can be undertaken by a school, a community organization, any type of focused area. And I'll talk a little bit about what I mean by that. So the idea is you would take poster prints of the art and place them in storefronts, on sides of buildings, bus shelters, sprinkle them across neighborhoods, campuses, shopping centers, or any other targeted area. And so just looking at this image is a typical commercial posting. And as you can see, there is text and it's very clear. It's an advertisement. You know what they're trying to do. You know why you're seeing this. But in contrast, I think that an environmental graffiti art, and this is a mock-up of the same display, would be posted with no text and no copy. You're going to walk by this and you're going to eventually say, what's this thing? Why is it here? What does it mean? You might walk by 3 or 4 times and finally at some point you might be willing to scan the code. And then when you scan the code, you will be surprised to discover the art is actually derived from climate science. And through this interactive process, you start to engage more with the underlying science. The QR code takes you to a landing page, which, here, we can keep, Tobias, we can move through a few of these slides just to show them. These are just more mock-ups. And then here, this is an example of the information, some of the basic information that would be on a landing page. So on the left is the art, of course. And then when you scan, you would see an image of the underlying graph and a summary message. You can't really read it here, but that's the gist of it. And then whoever is sponsoring the campaign or the project or the exhibit is able to add customized content. To me, as educators, I think this would be an opportunity to ask questions, and either on the page or separately, challenge people to see the understanding of the science by, testing them. So, you can create, almost like an educational challenge, go find the art, scan it, read about it, and answer some questions. Another thing that could be on a landing page is, of course, information about the sponsor wants to share, or particular challenge, like a call to action challenge. One of the things that I like to think about is similar to other challenges out there, but I call it the JOT, which is just one thing, where you would list some options for individuals to take, individual actions that would address climate change, and they could commit to one of them as part of, what you would have at the end of the landing page. So the point is, this can be very customized. I think this is a fun, interactive challenge to encourage residents and other potential customers, because one of the things that I envision with a collection that's in a targeted areas, you would create a scavenger hunt where people would go around and to see find as much art as possible, scan it, learn about it, and bring people into local businesses, put the art in store windows, have people come in, get discounts. There's a lot of ways to make this a community project that is good for everybody. It's perfect for an environmental class, club, or other group or organization. And some good news that I can share is that the art, just scoot back for one sec. The art is free. And what I mean by that is my art is free. I provide all environmental graffiti imagery at no charge. That's my mission. That's my way of making up for over 3 decades of practicing corporate law. I want to get the art out there as a communication tool and a way of telling the story about climate change. So I feel like everybody's going to have costs in doing an exhibit, and your own cost in doing an environmental graffiti exhibit will be printing, if you choose to print, and if it's a poster campaign, or if it's an exhibit with other materials, that's your only cost. And I don't handle printing, I facilitate it, but these are all third-party printers. So I think we can just roll through a few of the slides that show some examples of how you can just back one more, just to show you can enhance a campaign by collaborating with other schools, organizations, collect it to local environmental programs. As I mentioned, challenges like scavenger hunts, create custom landing pages, and you create some buzz with local media to make to any kind of social media, or to make the campaign known, where people can go out and look for the art. And other interesting venues and ways of, you can rent space on digital signs, and this gives you the ability to change imagery, to do various images of art and change the QR codes, obviously. And, I think the main concept is people will walk by the art. And, when you take it outside of the walls of institutions, they'll encounter it unexpectedly, stumble across it, if you will. And, it helps reach people who weren't otherwise looking to be educated about climate science. You can see a couple more, move forward. There we go, a couple more examples. And, obviously any kind of odd place that people pass by that has, regular public access is a great option. So finally, I think that you can see there are many ways you can use environmental graffiti to enhance your mission and amplify your message. It's another way to tell the story. Art is a great way to tell the story. It's a story that urgently needs to be told and should be told in as many ways as possible to reach the greatest number of people. And if you're considering using the art, I would love to talk to you about how it would work for you. And thanks for your time.
Thank you, Alisa. It's truly amazing. And one of the things that's interesting is we talked last week with our main coordinators in Latin America at the Universidad de los Andes in Bogota, Colombia. And they are, that university is now using a technique that they call clase a la calle, class in the street, and taking the education out of the walls of the university. So very consistent. So before we turn to questions and comments for Alisa, I do want to give Eben a chance to present about the worldwide teach-in in general, and then for those of you who can remain, we can engage in question and answer and discussion. So go ahead, Eben.
Thank you, David. And Alisa, Natalie, thank you so much for fabulous work. There's so many, there's so much urgency, right, to engage a broader audience, and we need every tool in the toolkit to do it. So excited to actually reach out to our museum here at Bard and see if we can get them involved in our teaching. So I wanted to speak with you all briefly about the opportunity to get involved with us next March. So we are at this, critical moment where we can't wait until next month or next year, and we need, as educators, to figure out how to engage as many people on our campus as we can in this dialogue as quickly as possible. And that's why we set up the Worldwide Teach-In on Climate and Justice, to really have kind of a stronger together kind of approach. And so we have a 10-minute video, which I'm not going to show today, which sort of takes you through the nuts and bolts of our program. But I want to just give you a brief overview of the program. We'll send out that video. It kind of covers the details.
Tobias, you could put the link in the video in the chat too, so that people can view it.
Yeah,
it's already there. He's so fast.
So this is our teach-in website, and the header is: the biggest threat to our future is thinking that someone else will lead, that someone else will solve the climate crisis. So by virtue of you coming here today, we know you're interested, and we want to help you take the next steps. So here is our video. And the next step really is a commitment. So we would love you to make a decision today that on or around March 29th, 2022, something will happen at your campus, or your college, your high school, your organization. And we'd love you to go to this registration page today and and make the commitment. So you basically just sign up. We've got about 20 people, 20 organizations, 20 schools signed up at this point. And we need to get 1,000 between now and next March. We need you to be those people, and we need you to reach out to your colleagues and make them aware of the Worldwide Teach-In. So we have information sessions these days, Wednesdays at 10 and 9 every week. Typically, we'll have a little more time to spend on the teach-in organizing than today and get into a little bit more detail. So please, people our way. In terms of kind of what you do on those days, it's wide open, but we have really good models. So I'm going to take you just quickly to our website to encourage you to explore a little bit more there. If you go to the our models page on the website, you'll see that we've got really all the detail you need, and lots of different ways that you could put together an event, an all-campus event that brings people together from across the disciplines that we've talked about already today, how it's, artists and engineers, it's biologists, it's economists. And the key to a powerful teach-in is really just relying on your local educators, your local climate concern faculty. And we've got models to push it into the classroom that we call Make Climate a Class, as well as models to have it across extracurricular or evening events that bring people together from across the campus. This year, we've got options related to climate comedy and climate theater. One thing we're doing is running a global playwriting contest. So if you know any playwrights, students, or others that want to write 5 to 7 minute plays, we'll be selecting the best of those and pushing them out for performance at universities across the world. So once again, a lot of options. I'm going to just end my little piece here by showing you sort of the teaser video, the short video, which is just 2 minutes long, that kind of gets at the idea of what we're trying to achieve this year. So we'll do that, and then we can pause for questions. So let me start this guy. It's going to play. I hope it does.
Your worldwide teaching will mobilize the power of educators and students and empower a generation of fighters to stabilize the climate and advance climate.
There you go.
We all need to get comfortable talking about climate all the time. The teaching helps us do that.
The worldwide teaching is equal to organizing events on campus or community on or around March 29th, 2023.
The key to successful teaching is relying on homegrown talent, not outside experts. The more local educators you involve directly from your school or community, the more people will attend the event.
They will do this gladly because they are really worried about climate change, just like you.
Our team is here to support you, but you have to step forward. Join us.
Okay, so that's just a teaser. We'll send out the full 10-minute video. Please watch it. It's got lots of good ideas and kind of explains in more detail. The theory of change behind this project is that you're here, obviously, because you are deeply climate concerned, and so are your colleagues. We know that 50, 80, 90% of teachers and faculty and students at most college universities and high schools around the world get it. I mean, they understand climate change is real and threatening their future. And we want to figure out how to tap into that widespread concern, bring those educators into the table and empower them to talk about climate change, not as climate experts, but as historians or scientists or philosophers or psychologists who can bring their own kind of disciplinary perspective to bear and excite students with the idea of getting academically engaged in climate change, learning about it, and also thinking about climate change solutions and justice internships and jobs and careers, because it's going to take an army to solve this problem. And we are the people whose job it is to educate that army and excite them to do this work over the next year, 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, right? That's our mission. That's our job. So we're excited to help you out. Glad to have one-on-one conversations with anybody. But the main thing is, please sign up. Please make the commitment today that you're going to be part of this movement. You're going to do something. You don't have to specify what it is yet, but that you're going to help lead some kind of educational initiative on your organization, your campus, on or around March 29th, 2023, and help us get to 1,000 schools and 1 million participating students. Thanks, David.
All right, well, thank you, Eben and Alisa and Natalie, and thank you all for being with us. If you want to continue and have some question and answer, we're going to just go from here. And if you want to stay, and if you need to go. But thank you all for your work. We will follow up with a recording of the presentations and, well, the whole thing, including any follow-up discussion that we have right now. So thank you for your great work. So Alisa, I want to begin with the question with you, which is, how did you get started on this amazing endeavor, looking at these graphs and deciding that you could use art as a way to communicate about them? And unmute yourself, please.
I feel like, to me, it was seeing graphs and charts, which are readily available in the media, and seeing very dramatic trajectories going one way or the other. Temperatures rising, ice melting, whatever you're looking at, it was frightening and scary. And was sort of wondering, why aren't people jumping up and down about this? Why isn't this getting through? And it just occurred to me, since I wanted to focus on both the climate change cause and the art, there just happened to be a happy marriage there between the two. And I thought I would experiment and see if I can, honestly, not to spend too much time on this, but I had spent a year taking Braille messages and turning them into greeting cards for a Chicago Lighthouse organization. And the concept of using the underlying messaging as a blueprint to create the art was already something I'd been doing for a year. So I started to experiment with charts and graphs, and literally you can morph from the graph to the art. And it just occurred to me that maybe I can get people to focus on the graph by gathering their attention with the art. And so, as you can see, the art is vividly colored, highly saturated. When it's printed, it's glossy and very arresting. The idea is I want to pull people in. I want them to be curious, to walk over and see, what is this about? And that was the idea of that. I also saw some aesthetic elements in the underlying graphs and charts that I found intriguing. I think I like the restriction of having to create something, when you're constrained versus having a blank sheet of canvas in front of me.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I love the fact that you were sort of pre-adapted to that, using the biological term by your work with interpreting Braille. So.
And one of the things that I think was mentioned by somebody, that I should just, full disclosure, I do not have any scientific background, but I think that's kind of a good thing, because I think it shows that this kind of information, the gist of it at least, is accessible to everybody. And that's part of what I try to do, is to not only provide the art that gets you to the science, but also a brief summary message. So if you're walking around an exhibit of 20 pieces, you will get tidbits of information that you can take away, that hopefully are not as overwhelming as trying to analyze. You're not expected to do a deep analysis of the charts and graphs. There's a summary message to give you an idea of what's the point of that particular artwork.
It's nice. Yeah. So are there anybody want to make comments or ask questions to either Alisa or Natalie, and I can speak on behalf of the teacher if you had questions based on what Even said, or comments.
I have a quick question for Natalie. I'm just wondering how, from your perspective of academic museums, how you view the commitment to the public versus to the students. The community, whether you feel the role of an academic gallery is to, assist the curriculum, or to speak more to the general public of the community.
Yeah, so these things move in cycles, right? So really, academic museums looked to the larger community beyond the campus, especially in the 1980s. Grant applications would really look for just purely numbers, like busloads, literally, from K through 12 in their regions. But then in the 1990s, the Mellon Foundation really started to invest in these staff positions, creating these staff positions, funding them to try to get kind of an overflow of PhDs with expertise into museums, with the stated job of connecting curriculum and collections and museum programming. And so that investment then across a number of different institutions that received those grants, it's sort of seeded this re-engagement with the curriculum, with the on-campus kind of focus of academic museums and galleries. And I think, frankly, we've reached a new moment in the last, I'd say, just the last 6-7 years of recognizing that we turned away a little too much from the local community, and we've gotten really, really good as a field at serving the curriculum and serving all of our colleagues across campuses. And now there's a movement to kind of rebalance that and to turn back to the larger community. Part of that has to do with the political reality of what's happened in the United States, particularly over the past 6 years. But
So
there
there's
was
a role that the museum can play now.
Right. You know, there are studies that actually in the past several years that have shown that museums are one of the last and most trusted institutions in cities and communities around the country. And I think that that has led certainly to, or fed into, an awareness on many campuses that as the public facing entity, one of the few public facing entities on campuses, academic museums and galleries have become even more vital to the health and well-being of our communities, both on campus and off.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that fits right in with, you know, the teach-in, this idea of taking people who are based at institutions and to educate people who are not necessarily their direct students or enrolled students, and trying to engage with the broader community, something that we all recognize that we need to be doing. So what do you think for those of you, I don't see any faces, I just see names on the screen here, but are there things that you've listened to today that you think might resonate with you and the kinds of work that you want to be doing over this coming year? Or do you have questions, things that you want to share about what you're thinking about yourselves? Javeria, did you want to say something? I see you're not muted. I'm not sure if you're unmuted to speak or you're just unmuted. Or anybody else.
It's a quiet group this morning.
Yeah, yeah. Well, for a lot of them, we have. I know there's several people from Asia who it's pretty late for them, so we're glad to have you. So I think we will wrap it then. And again, thank everybody for being here. Thank the Faculty Collaborative for being our partner in these webinars. Thank Alisa and Natalie for their presentations. And again, we will have another set of basically a rerun of this presentation, or set of presentations at 9 o'clock Eastern New York time tonight. And so please help us to spread the word, and you know, every person who learns about this is likely to share with others. So thank you all for being with us, and